Hey, in this lesson, we'll get to know some great tools that we'll be using throughout the course. These are grids and columns, which will help us position layers exactly where we want them. Let's go back to the empty canvas and then go to the toolbar on the upper right corner and click on the View button to explore the different options it offers. First, select Show Rulers. After selecting it, we can enable or disable the rulers we used in previous videos, remember? I recommend that you work with them all the time. Sketch works with pixels by default. Why? Because this is a platform intended for digital design. You'll see that when hovering over the ruler, a red guide appears both vertically and horizontally. So we can click anywhere on the ruler to add a guide. These guides will help us to position our objects properly using them as a reference. So you can remove the guides by clicking on one of them and dragging it outside. Let's see how to do it. Okay, so I click on it and then drag it outside and it disappears. Let's move on to the next sketch feature, which are the grids. Click on View and then Show Grid. After selecting this feature, a square grid appears on the canvas. But first, let's remove some of the guides recently created to work more comfortable with, okay? So, this is the square grid and is divided into blocks of 200 by 200 pixels. It is every 200 pixels there is a thicker line which delimits the end of each block. This tool is quite useful for working with consistent sizes and proper distances between objects, as well as for making sure that all the objects are well adjusted to the grid. We can edit the block size and color by clicking on the grid settings. However, instead of a square grid, we'll be working with a layout grid. So, disable this grid and select the option Show Layout Grid, which is here, okay? Nowadays, numerous websites have been designed using a series of predetermined grids formed by columns and rows. These grids are really helpful for designing with precision the size and proportions of the objects. After activating the Show Layout option, let me zoom in first. Okay, so you'll see on the canvas these columns and gutters, which, as far as I am aware, are based on the Bootstrap's column system, which is a popular framework for designing websites. However, let's say we want to create our own column system with a grid different from the Bootstrap one. What should we do? Go to the View button and then click on Layout Settings. A new window pops up and there we can modify the layout settings. We're going to look into each setting one by one in order to generate the grid we'll be using throughout the course. Grids, like this one, are made up by columns and gutters. These concepts may be familiar to you if you've experienced in editorial design and have worked before with InDesign. Among the different parameters, we can edit the total width, the offset, it is what we are going to have the right or left of our grid, the number of columns. We can also decide if we want our grid has gutter on outside or not. Here below, we can also set the gutters and columns width. Let's increase the gutter width, for instance. As you can see, it also affects the column width, which obviously will be smaller, and the other way around. Apart from the columns, we can also activate and deactivate rows. There it goes. With this option, we generated the horizontal divisions. Of course, we can also edit the rows parameters like the gutter and row height. I particularly don't use rows very often, but it's necessary to know these options in case we need it. At the bottom of the panel, we find other parameters to determine the aspects of these columns or rows. We can select Fill Grid or Stroke Outline and change colors. We can even save one grid as a default grid with this button especially when frequently using a grid different from the one provided by a sketch. For our projects, we'll be using a custom grid. That's why we're going to edit the parameters of this window, and if you want, make it default. Let's set the total width at 1320 pixels, the offset at 60 pixels, and when I change these parameters, the grid automatically changes as well. Can you see it? I don't want gutter on outsides, and I'll select 12 columns. After these changes, they may be off-centered, so it's important to center them. I'm going to set the gutter width at 20 pixels and the column width changes automatically to 92 pixels. Hit OK. Once the grid has been created, we are ready to start working with our artboard and adding objects. In the next video, we are going to work with objects. See you there!